Jefferson Davis had finally had enough. He demanded to know what Johnston planned to do to stop the Yankees. And when the general refused to outline a specific plan, he finally lost all patience. In the evening of July 17th, a telegram arrived from Richmond removing Johnston from command and replacing him with John Bell Hood. The next morning, the Corps commanders met with Johnston and urged him to delay the transfer of command. He refused. Bidding goodbye to his men, he rode off. Hood now had what he had long sought, command of an army, and he lost no time in preparing his plans. When Sherman heard that Hood was now in command, he summoned Schofield, who had known Hood at West Point. Schofield warned Sherman, "He'll hit you like hell, now, before you know it." Schofield was right. Hood's reputation as a headstrong fighter would soon manifest itself. The new Confederate commander planned to hit Sherman's army as it crossed Peachtree Creek before they could consolidate on the south side. But Hood was new to Army command, and coordinating the larger numbers of troops proved to be more difficult than he anticipated. Last-minute changes, delays deploying in the wooded terrain, and poor communication caused the attacks to start hours late, by which time all the Federals had crossed the creek and were well positioned. Attacking in succession from the right flank to the left, few Confederate units made any progress at all. Those that did were quickly thrown back by reserve units crossing the creek and rushing into the fight. Hood's assaults cost the attackers some 3,000 casualties versus only 1,700 for the Yankees. It was a gruesome forebearer of things to come. But Hood was not yet finished. Before Sherman could regroup, Hood planned to shift his main forces south through Atlanta and strike McPherson's two corps east of the city. McPherson's men were busy tearing up the Georgia Railroad between Decatur and Atlanta, and Hood was confident he could slip around their left flank and strike where he was least expected. McPherson and Sherman were close friends. Just a few months earlier, McPherson had requested leave to get married. Sherman had refused to let him go so close to the start of a new campaign and had promised to grant him leave when Atlanta was taken. Now Sherman was pressing McPherson's corps to hurry the work of isolating the city from the rest of the South. The Federal commander seemed obsessed with destroying the railroad. McPherson's familiarity with Hood's aggressive style made him nervous about his vulnerable left flank, and he argued with Sherman to let him post his men to defend against the flank attack he felt sure was coming. At dusk on July 21st, Hood's attacking forces began moving to their starting positions. The plan called for Hardee to attack first, striking the left rear of McPherson's trenches, first with Bates, then Walker's, then Cleburne's, then Maney's divisions. Following this, the corps of Benjamin Cheatham would strike the east side of McPherson's trenches with the divisions of Smith, Stevenson, and Clayton. To mass this many troops south of the city, the men of the two corps faced an all-night march and deployment in difficult terrain in the dark to be ready for an attack at dawn. The timetable quickly broke down. Cleburne's men had been in contact with the Federals all day and had difficulty breaking off. The rest of Hardee's men, weary from the fighting and marching, trudged through unmapped countryside, and at daylight were still 6 miles from their objective. It was noon before Hardee was ready to attack. On the far left of McPherson's line were 2 brigades of Thomas Sweeney's division. Slightly behind the line, they quickly faced east and southeast as skirmishing broke out to their front. The Confederates advanced, expecting to find the undefended rear of McPherson's corps. Instead, they ran directly into Sweeney's well-placed men. The divisions of Bates and Walker had a real fight on their hands. Walker himself was one of the first casualties. The Confederates, exhausted by the fighting at Peachtree Creek and the long night march, were unable to make any headway against the resolute defense of Sweeney's bluecoats, and eventually fell back into the woods. To the left of this effort, Cleburne's division, arguably the best in the Southern Army, achieved the only penetration of the Yankee lines on that part of the field. His men pushed through the gap between Sweeney and the rest of McPherson's line and forced the men of Giles Smith to pull back to a new position. At this moment, about 2 p.m., McPherson sent to Logan for reinforcements and headed off to Smith's position to see what could be done to slow the Confederate advance. He had gone only 150 yards when he ran into skirmishers from Cleburne's command under Captain Richard Beard of the 5th Confederate Regiment. Beard raised his sword and called for McPherson's surrender. McPherson tipped his hat, wheeled about, and raced for safety. Beard ordered his men to shoot. The gunfire struck McPherson in the lower back, and he fell from his horse. Beard's men rushed to the scene.
You're my prisoner now, you damn Yankee. Who is this?
You've just killed the best man in our army.
Sherman was at his headquarters when the news of McPherson's death came in. The loss of his friend and protege was devastating. Blackjack Logan temporarily succeeded to the Army command, and his particular brand of leadership did much to stem the ferocious Confederate assaults. Cleburne and Maney charged again and again, but the Yankees clung to their works with great tenacity, tearing great holes in the rebel ranks. For reasons never explained, Hood delayed sending Cheatham's men into the fight for several hours. Finally, as Hardee's men were expending their last measure against the stubborn Federals, Hood ordered Cheatham forward. Had this attack occurred at the same time as Hardee's, the Union line might have broken. As it was, Logan shifted troops to meet the attacks, and most of Cheatham's corps ran into the same unyielding defense. From behind their breastworks, the Bluecoats poured out a galling fire that shattered most of the Southern assault. One brigade under Arthur Manigault advanced against the Union troops of Morgan Smith, the brother of Giles, whose line was momentarily weakened by the loss of troops sent south to bolster the other flank. Manigault's men surged into the thin blue line and overran the trenches. They swarmed about the troop hurt house just behind the lines. Sherman appeared on the battlefield at this moment and ordered some 20 guns into battery to support the retiring Yankees. Sighting the first piece, a stray shot passed close to his cheek. Coolly, Sherman returned the compliment.
Fire!
Logan, meanwhile, shifted troops back from the other flank and mounted a counterattack. Manigault's men had not been reinforced and gradually fell back in the face of the aggressive assault. Confederates continued to attack the Union lines for the rest of the day. Cleburne and Maney launched repeated assaults against the tired defenders of Leggett's Hill, so called by the Yankees of Mortimer Leggett's division who fought there. The Confederates succeeded only in adding to the growing list of casualties, and by nightfall, the fighting had finally died out. The two sides were roughly where they had been when the day started, with the Yankees minus over 5,400 men, a third of whom were missing or captured. Hood, on the other hand, had lost more than 8,000 men. In less than a week since taking command, Hood had gambled and lost nearly 25% of his army, almost as many as Johnston had lost in 10 weeks. Of all the losses, none would be more felt than that of McPherson. A few days after the battle, Sherman wrote to Emily Hoffman in Baltimore, McPherson's fiancée. "I yield to no one on earth but yourself the right to exceed me in lamentations for our dead hero." Sherman's strategy after these fiery confrontations was to lay waste to the railroads surrounding and supplying the city. 3 of the 4 rail lines were either already in Federal hands or had been destroyed by Sherman's troops. Only the Macon and Western still connected Atlanta to the outside world, and Sherman set about to sever that link as decisively as he had the others. His first task was to find a permanent replacement for McPherson. Logan had proved himself capable, but was not a professional soldier and had earned the enmity of George Thomas, who opposed his appointment vehemently. Joseph Hooker was senior, but Sherman despised him and rejected him out of hand. He settled finally on Oliver Howard, and the choice angered Hooker so that he tendered his resignation. Sherman eagerly accepted it. With this task completed, Howard's men began a complicated movement around the city to attack the railroad from the west, while 2 separate cavalry columns, led by Edward McCook and George Stoneman, were to converge on Lovejoy Station, 7 miles south of Jonesboro, and begin destroying the railroad tracks. McCook arrived first, but was driven off by Joseph Wheeler's Confederate cavalry. Stoneman arrived several days late, and he too was soon running from Wheeler's men. At Sunshine Church, Wheeler surrounded the Yankees. Stoneman sent 2 of his brigades off, while he and the 3rd Brigade stood to fight a delaying action. By day's end, Stoneman and 700 of his troopers were prisoners. Ironically, Stoneman had planned to sweep past the railroad to free some 5,000 Federals imprisoned at the infamous Andersonville, a few miles away. Now, many of his command ended up there, only as inmates, not as liberators. With the failure of the cavalry, the job of cutting Hood's supply line fell to the Federal infantry. Hood attempted to block their movement, and a sharp fight erupted at Ezra Church. Again, the Confederates launched frontal assaults against Yankees who were ready for them. Another 5,000 were lost to the ranks, while the Federals suffered only 600 casualties. Hood had now sacrificed almost 20,000 soldiers out of the 60,000 he had inherited from Johnston. The Confederates' ability to defend Atlanta was diminishing by the day. With Hood blocking the way, the next month was spent by both armies in the monotonous routine of trench warfare. Sherman's artillery pounded the city of Atlanta mercilessly, despite the protests of Hood that Sherman was killing non-combatants. Finally, Sherman decided to strike the railroad with his entire army. Swinging west and south, the armies of Howard and Thomas reached the railroad and began tearing up miles of track, bending them into what the men called Sherman's hairpins, and filling in deep cuts with debris. Hood was slow to respond to this threat, and his understrength army was weary and dispirited. Still, he had to try and stop the Federals' destruction of his last supply line. On August 31st, near Jonesboro, the rebels once again charged into prepared Yankee positions with the predictable result. The first day of the battle cost the Confederates yet another 1,700 men, more than 10 times the Federal casualties. That night, Hood withdrew part of his force to Atlanta, and the next day, the Yankees launched their own attack. At an angle in the Confederate line, 2 regiments broke through the defenses and swarmed over the works. The color guard of the 6th Kentucky all died defending their colors, and a Yankee soldier grabbed the flag, waving it defiantly at the retreating rebels. The Confederate defeat at Jonesboro gave Sherman final control of the railroad, and Atlanta was completely cut off. Hood quickly evacuated the city, not wishing to be trapped there, and blowing up his ordnance train as he departed. The city was surrendered to the Yankees by civilians, and Sherman gleefully wired Washington of the success.
Yes, sir.
I want you to send a telegram to General Grant in Petersburg. Atlanta is ours and fairly won.
Oh, yes, sir. With pleasure. With pleasure.
The news electrified the North and delivered a major setback to the Democratic opponents of Abraham Lincoln. Presidential campaigning was in full swing, and Lincoln's opponents were advocating a peace settlement with the South on the premise that the war effort was a failure. Sherman's victory seemed to say otherwise, and Lincoln's re-election chances were considerably improved. Grant was still battling Lee slowly back to Richmond, and the end of the war was still 7 months away. But Sherman's blazing campaign had put new hope in the hearts of every Northern family that the end was somehow a little closer.
Melting into death's inferno on they came, and the smoke and fire transformed them into devils. At the end they knew they'd never be the same. At the end they knew they'd never be the same. And the rains became the tears of a generation, hot winds that fan to fire of victory. Charred ruins were their monuments to glory. Look around you for their painful memory. Look around you for their painful memory. Stewart's great cavalry, pride of the Southland. For nights they would ride through the dawn. Invisible armor still rode at his side. He never was wounded in body or pride. But at Yellow Tavern, young Jeb was to die. outnumbered, gray knights stake their ground. At the crossroads to Richmond they stand, blue Michigan warriors with death in their eyes collide with the thunder that flashed across the sky. And at Yellow Tavern young Jeb was to die. Phil's big black filly, young Custer's gold hair, wrote a proud page of history that day, as their sabers and cannon turned soil bloody red. The pride of the Southland was carried away. Death knelled for the night, a price too high to pay. Death long forgotten, no eulogy prayer, but the loss of this night was so dear, and the bell tolled for Jeb was a thunder that day. Death knell for the night, the price too high to pay. Death knell for the night, the price too high to pay.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.